You can ask questions and respond to questions using the chat function, which should be on the right-hand side of your screen. We will respond to some questions during the webinar and some at the end of the presentation, whichever makes more sense. And just to get started, I would love to hear about where everyone's from and what kind of organizations they represent. So if you wouldn't mind just using the chat function to let us know where you're from, what field you work in, and your name. And that way, it's a good chance for everyone to practice asking questions, as well as a chance for us to get to know the audience a little bit better. This presentation will be made available on the Camoin Associates blog after the webinar. So we are recording this webinar, so it'll be available on YouTube, and the slides will be available on our blog, and we'll provide you with the links to that at the end of the webinar. So as I said, this is the fourth and final webinar in a four-part series sponsored by Camoin Associates in the trends in the field of workforce development and how economic development and workforce development can collaborate to support businesses and individuals. Information about the previous webinars can be found in the Camoin Associates blogs, and slides from this webinar will be posted there as well. We're looking forward to conducting more webinars in the future, so if there are any topics you would like us to cover, please let us know by emailing us or tweeting at us at Camoin Associates. Speaking of Twitter, for any listeners who are using Twitter, the webinars in this series will be live tweeted by Camoin Associates' newest employee, Alex Trainmer, using the hashtag EDBridgeWD, which you can see at the bottom of all the slides. Alex is tweeting at Alex Trainmer, that's T-R-A-N-M-E-R. You can see that at the bottom left-hand side of the slide we're on currently. So just to give a little bit of background about our presenter for this webinar, Colleen LaRose. Colleen LaRose is a workforce development specialist at Camoin Associates and the founder and CEO of the Northeast Regional Employment and Training Association. Colleen is a highly regarded workforce development expert and a champion of getting workforce development and economic development to collaborate. She has over 20 years of experience in workforce development public policy and has been featured as a speaker at both workforce and economic development conferences across the country, including the International Economic Development Council, Northeast Economic Development Association, and National Association of Workforce Development Professionals. In 2012, Colleen founded the Northeast Regional Employment and Training Association, or NERETA, which has been essential to providing training to economic development and workforce organizations and opening the line of communications between these two groups. Camoin Associates is a full-service economic development consulting firm headquartered in Saratoga Springs, New York, and we're sponsoring these webinars. Thank you again for joining us. If you have any questions, please, again, use the chat function to let me know. And if you all wouldn't mind taking a moment just to introduce yourself, let us know your name, where you're from, and what kind of organization you work for. And at this point, I'm going to go ahead and pass the presentation to Colleen. We have a lot of slides, a lot of information to get through, so be prepared for a lot of information. Colleen?
Yes, thank you very much, Ian. And, you know, Ian's absolutely right. This is going to be kind of like drinking from a fire hose. And I want to apologize up front for that in a way, but honestly, I just, there's so much great stuff going on out there, and I want you to be able to see that it's possible to do things in a myriad of different ways. And so I started with this slide. This is my own saying. This isn't attributable to anyone. But really, in the long run, nobody really knows what they're doing. And we're all kind of figuring out life and how to organize as a society, and what it means to be a human being, and how to be prosperous, and all of these things are things that we're all figuring out as we go along. So once you realize that nobody really has all the answers, then you can open up your mind and realize that, well, then almost anything is possible, because you can't mess up. The best thing you can do is to continue trying. And so, keeping that open mind, we'll move on to the next slide, Ian. And we do need to talk about things that keep us from being perhaps as progressive as what we would like to be. And one of those notions is something that we discussed in the very first webinar that we did in this series called Disconnect Between Education and Workforce Development. And in that webinar, if you didn't see it, I would really highly recommend that you go back and check it out, because we talk a lot about the educational philosophies and what it means to have an educational philosophy, and how that makes a difference in how you see the world, how you approach the world. It's not just being a conservative or a liberal. I mean, there are nuances and gray areas in between all of that. And so, some of this is, are we interested in, when we talk about what an educated person is, are we interested in that person being, appreciative of learning for the sake of learning? Do we want them to have a sense of culture, in that they appreciate music and they appreciate literature and they know about other cultures in the world, those kinds of things? They understand the history of humanity. Are those the kinds of knowledge bases that we think is an educated person? Or are we talking about someone who can perform a skill in the marketplace where they get paid for that skill? And I would argue that an educated person is all of these things, and that's really where the difficulty therein lies, because you only have so many hours and minutes and seconds on the planet, and so how do you invest your time to make sure that you are getting out of your life what it is that you need in order to feel successful, to feel fulfilled, to feel happy, and at the end of the day, we don't take any of the material things with us. At the end of the day, were we fulfilled and happy with our lives is really all that matters. Not to get too philosophical here, but we are talking about philosophies. So this is going to come back and haunt us as we move through these slides today. So just keep this in mind, that nobody has any of the right, that none of the answers are the right answer. There are multiple correct answers. There are multiple wrong answers. There are multiple ideas and ways of looking at all of this. Okay, next slide, Ian. So, when we talk about economic development and workforce development, and this is really what this webinar today is about, how they can collaborate, the first thing we've got to think about is, well, why haven't they been collaborating before? Why, what has been the barrier between them that has kept them from being able to work in a cohesive way? And truly, workforce development has been very social services oriented. It comes out of the JTPA system, and this would be in our second webinar that we did in this series, if you want to go back and look at that one about the history and role of workforce development. But it has a reason for being very social services oriented. The history of workforce development has been in helping people who have barriers and challenges to getting into the workforce and helping them to find their way into self-sufficiency. Economic development, on the other side, is very much about supporting business and being profit-minded. And so these two ideas are conflicting sometimes. That's not to say that they can't work together, but they do have sometimes different ideals. So if you look at those arrows pointing away from each other in the middle, on the workforce development side, we're talking about sustainable wages. So we might be talking about improving the minimum wage, or we might be talking about, unionizing, or doing things that, provide worker safety issues, those kinds of things. On the other side, on economic development, we're talking about business profit, and that's the golden rule, and that's what drives. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, we have to have people in the world who are interested in making a profit, because otherwise the whole left side's not going to be employed at all. So we have to, recognize that there's a tremendous value to both sides, and try to find the balance and the synergies between the two. So next slide. Now, the third webinar that we did was on the new Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. And that is going to come into effect on July 1st. That will come into effect on July 1st of this year. And Ian, I'm getting some feedback. I just want to let you know. I don't know if okay. Anyway, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act is going to go into effect on July 1st of this year, and it will be an important big next step in the in how workforce development is accomplished going forward. Workforce development has traditionally been all about helping, as we had talked about, helping people who were having barriers. Ian, can you? I want to stop here. Ian, can you mute whatever's going on there? Because I'm having a hard time concentrating. We've got a lot of noise going on. Okay. Thank you. Okay. So anyway, the job-driven checklist is it was a report that came out from Vice President Biden's office, and that, as part of this new Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, it sort of lays out what's going to be important in this new legislation. And so the major ideas, and again, you want to look at the third webinar if you want to get more detail about this that we did last month. But obviously, it's about engaging employers, about helping job seekers, to look for training opportunities, making smart choices about how they spend their money, about measuring whether or not the training that they're getting is effective, are they getting higher paying jobs, et cetera. It's about opening doors in that, we're making sure that people who have challenges and barriers are able to get to where it is that they need to go. It's about creating regional partnerships, about not looking at political boundaries anymore, but recognizing, what the natural regional partnerships should be, and making sure that our scope of understanding is large enough that we're encompassing the entire region. It's about earning and learning, so it's about not just getting a job, but about continuing to be a lifelong learner and having opportunities to work while you're learning at the same time. And certainly about stepping stones, or what we now call career pathways, in that, what are the opportunities for you not only to get into a job, but what are the next steps to getting you to the next level of that job. Or in a similar, maybe you want to, in some cases your career moves sideways instead of forward, and that's okay, because sometimes the sideways slide eventually takes you forward. So, but those stepping stones are important. So next slide. So what I did for today's webinar is I broke this down as best I could, because this is a lot of different kinds of programs, organizations, initiatives, all kinds of things going on that make it kind of hard to grasp, how to put this into some kind of logical presentation for you. So I've broken it down in the following way, as you can see, 1 through 7, and we're going to walk through this. Some of these obviously could be, in one category or another, and these are just, I want to say that these are representative programs, initiatives, ideas going on. These are not, yes, to a large degree they are best practices, in that they're ones that have been noted as, or recognized as, being doing a good job, but that's not to say that there aren't a whole lot of other ones out there in the world that are also doing a fantastic job that just may not have come across my plate, or I may have chosen one over another simply for ease of being able to explain it or whatever. There's a lot of great stuff going on is what I'm trying to say. So as we move forward, don't feel bad if I've left out your organization. So moving forward, next slide, Ian. Collaboration on programs and initiatives. This is interesting. The very first level of economic development and workforce development seeming to kind of get together and decide to do something together usually results in one program or one initiative that they decide they're going to try to work on. And so, Ian, move forward to the next slide. And we're going to talk about Campus Philly first. This is kind of a cool program that they're doing in Philadelphia. And it's really surrounded around talent retention. They were having a lot of brain drain, as they call it, in the Philadelphia region. That is, they have a lot of wonderful colleges there and universities, but the students were leaving town, after they got their degrees. And Campus Philly has come up with a program where they really begin to imbue the student in the community. They really engage them as part of the community while they're going through college, and that has made a tremendous difference in the number of students that they've been able to keep in the community and therefore keep that talent in their region. So, and again, this is going to sound very surface. I'm not going into a whole lot of detail with any of these because there are so many of them. But, we do have a resource slide on the back that Alex put together, which is fantastic. And you can go through and you can click on the different programs and initiatives and kind of learn more about them as after the webinar. But Campus Philly is doing a great job of keeping the talent in the region, and that certainly is a big part of when we talk about workforce development. This can be at a high school level. I mean, I've heard people in, Wisconsin or whatever, say, we have students and they graduate from high school and they move on, they move out of the area, and we've done a great job of educating them through high school, and then we don't get them anymore. And so this is an issue that if you look at what they're doing in Philadelphia, you may get some ideas of what it is that you could do in your local region. Okay, next slide. Hire One is a program out of Chester County, Pennsylvania, and this is economic development and workforce development coming together and asking all of the employers in that county to hire one person in the coming year. Now, if you're a small mom and pop shop and you only have 3 employees, that's a lot harder to do than if you're a large corporation that has 200 employees, understandably. But it is, it's grabbing hold, and they're doing pretty well with this. And so, the companies sign up and, commit to trying to hire one person, and, they're provided with some extra supports, in helping them to find the right person, those kinds of things, by signing up for this campaign. And so that's, it's kind of neat. And then job seekers recognize that, gee, these employers are committed to hiring one person. I might be that one person. And so it gives them, the job seekers another avenue other than their normal job search websites to kind of go to and see which are the local employers that have committed to hiring one person this year. Okay, next slide. Okay, now this is on a statewide level, but again, it's an initiative, and so that's why I kind of put it in this category. But this is workforce development and economic development working together on a statewide level to create create an opportunity for employers to have a ready and skilled workforce, at least at the most basic level. And so this is something called the Workforce Readiness Credential. This one happens to be offered by ACT. There is another company that offers one called the National Workforce Readiness Credential. I think that's owned by Houghton Mifflin Harcourt now. But anyway, that is, these workforce readiness credentials are kind of basic baseline career readiness skills. So basic mathematics, basic English language skills, basic problem solving skills, basic, knowing to get to work on time and those kinds of things. Basic, I guess you want to call them social skills or soft skills in the workforce. So these are basics, the absolute basics that a person should have when they are entering the workforce. And Massachusetts is doing this in a really big way. They are going to have all of the people going through their TANF, which is Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, which is people who are on Board of Social Services roles, what we used to call welfare. So all of the TANF population is going to be offered to take this National Career Readiness Certificate. All of the people who are going through their adult education system are going to be offered this National Career Readiness Certificate. All of the high school students, before they graduate from high school, are going to be offered to take this National Career Readiness Certificate, as well as all of the students at the community college level in Massachusetts will be offered this. And basically what this just says to an employer is, I have the basic skills to come in and do work for you, in addition to whatever additional specific skills that I may have acquired through high school or college or whatever. But I at least have the most minimum and basic skills to be able to come to work for you. And it does, there's a couple of counties in north central Pennsylvania that have adopted this strategy with the same NCRC work readiness credential from ACT, and they're doing a good job with it. The community has really embraced this. The employers are buying into it. They're looking now on for people to put this NCRC on their resume, for entry level jobs, and so they are having an impact. So next slide. So when we talk about, so there are just, those were a few kind of basic initiatives that, economic development and workforce development can kind of get together on and think about working on those as specific projects together. But then you get to the next level and you go, okay, well, we're working on, these initiatives, but they're kind of, spotty. It's going on here, it's going on there. We need something that's going to give us a greater understanding of our region and how we might be able to begin working together on a regional level. And so the Heldrick Center, which is out of Rutgers University, actually did a study. It was a long study. It went from like 2001 to 2009, and they asked employers in a number of different industries what the skills were that they needed. They really were trying to delve down to find out what the skills gaps were in each of the occupations, in each of the industries. What they did is they brought the employers together based on industry into focus panels, and it was interesting. I mean, I was in attendance at the one on construction, and they had union and non-union employers sitting at a table together talking about what their skills gaps are and what their needs were. They also had, I was at the one for healthcare, and we recognized some of the issues around, not being able to train enough nurses and those kinds of things. And because they were at the table together, they began to plan and figure out what the solutions were that they could do to correct the situation in their region. And so what's interesting in when you're doing these studies is that you kind of need to agree on what the major industries are in your area, because you can't do these kinds of in-depth studies on everything. And ideally you start probably with one. You figure out what are the issues surrounding the major industry in our region, and once we learn how to do it, then we can go on and figure out what's going on with the other industries that are important to our region. But, as you're looking at this, you're looking at what the supply and demand issues are. But be careful, because as you're looking at supply and demand, that's very economic development oriented to say supply and demand. There are X number of potential employees, there are X number of people out of work, there are X number of jobs. If we could just get these people the skills to fill those jobs, then we got it made. Well, if you're in workforce development, it's just not that simple. That's not how it works, because there are all kinds of other barriers and challenges that people have that keep them from being able to go to work, whether it's a disability, whether it's a child care issue, a transportation issue, an issue of, impoverishment that's affecting them in another way, their health care, whatever. So there are a lot of reasons why it's not a clear-cut supply and demand issue. So as you're sitting down with workforce development and economic development, as you're sitting down and talking these things through, take time to really listen to one another. Don't be so sure that you know what the answers are before you know what all the questions are that need to be asked. And then, as you're doing this, you certainly want to gather up as much labor market information in your region as possible and share that information with one another, and so that everyone at the table has at least the same basic understanding of what's going on in the region with regard to the labor market. Okay, next slide. Now, the Northeast Regional Employment and Training Association 3 years ago started this idea of economic developers take your WIB director to lunch day. And it's kind of a goofy thing. It's a very long title. I don't know how well it has caught on, because we really don't follow up and ask people, did you do it, did you do it? But we've determined that it's the first Friday in June. And it's really what the International Economic Development Council has been supportive of this idea, which is great. And so we're really excited that we have Jeff Finkel on board, as supportive of this. And the idea really is just, you got to start somewhere. You've got to start with talking with one another if you're going to, whether it's starting with one initiative or whether it's starting with planning. Somehow you've got to get the conversation started, and the conversation really does need to begin with economic development and workforce development. You can bring in other partners, you can bring in education, you can bring in political folks, you can bring in job seekers, you can bring in parents, you can bring in all kinds of people at later dates. But the very first thing you have to do is get the WIB director and the economic development folks, at the table to talk with one another about what the talent pipeline potential is and what it is you're trying to accomplish. Next slide. So we've shown this slide in a couple of webinars, I think, before, so I won't spend too much time on it. But this is really kind of the conversation starter. If you do go to lunch together, this is an opportunity for you to kind of sit down and talk about what's important in your region, and how do we get this conversation started? How do we get to the point of actually starting to do strategic planning together? And so it's really a matter of evaluating, both economic development and workforce development's vision and goals. And they may be different from one another, but you can find synergies between the two. And that's really that's where the opportunity is. You want to find where are the synergies, what is possible. Don't look for what you think differently from one another, or where the deficits are. Look for the opportunities to work together. Okay, next slide. So as you're doing this vision alignment, was introduced by Sarah Miller from the Council on Adult and Experiential Learning to a project that they are working on with Avalanche Consulting in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And they are you know, kind of looking at, you know, who are the underemployed people in the region, what are the, you know, what are the jobs that could potentially be available, what are the skills that are missing. They're going to be going through like a 6-month project. What's interesting is that this is being led by the Chamber of Commerce, and it's being funded from a number of different organizations. Their utility company, they have their local, what we would call the CAP agency, that's doing like the child care issues and, you know, kind of more of the social services kinds of things. They have an Indian nation out there that has a council of governments that's, you know, putting in money for this study. They've gotten some funding from the Economic Development Administration, and they've gotten some funding from a private foundation. So they're looking at several different resources to kind of cobble together what it is that they need in order to do this research project. And I think that that's important to take note of, that, you know, it's not always just, it's not going to be easy, you know. I mean, you know, sometimes you're going to have to go to several different resources to find what it is that you need. But what's important here are looking at, you know, as you're doing this vision alignment, what are the barriers to employment, as we talked about in the last slide? What are the education and training opportunities and career pathways in the region? And what does create a sustainable living? It's not just, you know, we have X number of people here and X number of jobs there. It's not that simple. So be ready for some complexity as you go into this and begin to try to align your vision. Okay, next slide. Now, I just came across this past week, and I really love this YouTube. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the TED Talks, but this is a TED Talk from a guy named Andy Chan, and he's at Wake Forest University. And he was in the, you know, what we used to call career services part. He's renamed that personal and professional development services, or personal and career development services at that university. And what they're doing is very unique, actually. From the day a student walks into that college now, they are engaged with career services. It's no longer something that is, you know, not thought about until their senior year, and sometimes the second semester of their senior year when they're looking for an internship. They are engaging the students right from the get-go. You can see that on their website. From each year, they have kind of a game plan for these students to begin engaging with employers, with associations, with, you know, professional mentors, you know, with people who can help them with their career ideas. You know, it used to be that each department, you know, if you had a department on engineering, that they were responsible for finding the engineering internships for the students, and they were the ones doing the outreach with the employers. Well, Career Services has said, you know what, this is a joint effort. We're all responsible. Sort of the idea of it takes a village to raise a child. You know, we're all responsible for helping this student to move from a college experience to a work experience. And so they have taken this on in a very big way, and I would highly recommend that you take a look at the YouTube video. I think that you'll learn a lot from that. And again, it's another way of looking at how you know, you can embrace a new vision for you know, in this case, your organization, but it certainly does relate to the community, because if you embrace each of the students in this way, when they leave the college, they're more likely to stay in the area because they feel committed to, you know, all of the resources that they've gathered in that region. I'm sorry, Ian, go ahead. Next slide. Okay. Now there's in some instances, it makes sense, and President Obama has talked about this in some of his State of the Union addresses. He's certainly very committed to the community colleges taking a very big role in being strategic planners, not just for what their community college is doing, but for strategic planning for the region. And so in some areas, it makes sense for the community college to take the lead in, creating this this economic development and workforce development vision, and so there's an organization called Mayor and Mayor. Rick Mayor has participated a lot in our NARETA groups, and I really appreciate that. I understand he's busy helping to write the rules and regs right now for the new legislation coming out, so we haven't heard a lot from him lately. But he has done quite a bit of work with community colleges and helping them to create strategic planning that embraces kind of the whole community, and what the benefits of the entire community would be. And in fact, it's been the Reclaiming the American Dream study or report that has been done by the American Association of Community Colleges highlights much of the work that he has done with this. So again, this is another resource for you to point to if in your region it makes sense for the community college to perhaps take a lead role in this. I'm gonna put this out there. I'm a little, and I've said this on LinkedIn, so I'm out there saying this publicly. I get a little bit concerned about higher education taking a lead role in doing strategic planning for a community because they are a business and they have a business profit motive. And so they're looking for, how many people are they going to be able to train, because that's where they make their money, and that's not always the best motivation for creating economic development and workforce development collaborative strategic planning opportunities. So I would call, if you decide that the community college is the right place to pull all of this together, because they have certainly the research people on board, and they have probably more resources available to them, frankly, than workforce development or economic development. And so in some cases it does make sense for the community college to take the lead, but I would caution you that you make sure that it's not done with a profit motivation, that it's done because they have the resources available, but the economic development and workforce development kind of co-captain that opportunity for strategic planning. Okay, next slide. Now, this CareerSource Florida is the state workforce investment system for the state of Florida. And the guy, Chris Hart, is the State Workforce Investment Board Director there. And there's a lot of information on this slide. I'm not going to read it all to you. I actually have a speech that he did for the International Economic Development Council that was given to me by Emily Brown at the IEDC. And I'd be happy to forward the speech to you if you'd like to see it. But he talks about, what I love about CareerSource Florida is that they are so resilient. And they try something and they look for, okay, what did we learn from that? What was it that were problems with that initiative? What's the next level of getting that done? And they are in a constant mode of reinventing themselves, of continuous improvement. And I totally respect that, because frankly, too often we throw out an initiative and we say, okay, this is the way it should be, and when it doesn't work out, it sort of fizzles, and the next administration picks up a different idea and then they run with a new idea. And instead of doing that, they have had this continuum going on where they're learning from what the problems were, what the value was and what they had done, and how they can take those ideas and move forward. And so I would suggest, again, I'm giving you a lot of stuff here, but I would suggest you taking a look at what CareerSource Florida has done, They created these banner centers in 2006. They recognized that the curriculum was too general, that they were having trouble getting it to be sustainable because they didn't have enough employer buy-in. The only time people were bought into the system was when it was being funded by the state, and so they needed to have some private sector, buy-in with that. So they recognized that they were having issues with that. Then they had this Career and Professional Education Act that was passed, but then they recognized that some of the problems there were the certifications were being led by providers. And so in other words, how, were these really things that were needed by industry, or was it just really about passing tests for the job seekers? So they wanted to make sure that they became more concentrated on, whether the certifications and passing those tests actually resulted in getting jobs. And so anyway, I'm not going to go through the whole thing with you, but you can see that they just continue to learn and grow and learn and grow, and I think that is probably in some ways the best model that I'm going to provide to you today, because that's exactly what's going to be required in your region, working together to create a good strategy for your region. And so that brings us to developing a common strategy, and how do we get there? Well, there are a lot of different possibilities, and the first one, next slide, Ian, the first one I'm going to talk with you about is called Lake Nona. Now, this is a really rich guy who had a whole lot of money, British billionaire Joe Lewis from Tavistock Group, and he came in with a 7,000-acre master plan city, near the Orlando area, and it's a high-tech city. It's got a mix of residential, and it's a lot of medical facilities. It's going to be the new home of the United States Tennis Association. It's got a championship golf course, and it's like all the homes are real high-tech. It's one of the 8 iconic connected cities in the country, so they have all this energy management stuff going on and unified communications. I mean, it's a really cool place. And if you happen to have a billionaire living in your region, and he can just provide you with, like a lot of money, and say, here's the potential for what you can do, that's cool. Honestly, most of us don't have that opportunity, but I did think that it was worth noting that if you happen to have somebody who is a billionaire and likes to do these kinds of things, talk to them about what the vision is for your region. Next slide. So this is a little more realistic, although this also relates to a company that has a whole lot of land called Plum Creek. They're major landowners in the United States, and in fact owned a great deal of land in this Alachua County, also in Florida by happenstance. And my friend Dale Brill from ThinkSpot brought this one to my attention. He's been working on this. And what's cool about this Envision Alachua, what I love is that they've written down all of the steps of everything that they've done. So this Plum Creek company that had all this land said, listen, we're gonna give some of this land over to the community, but you have to give us a plan for how you're going to use that land, and it has to be environmentally conscientious, and it has to be something that helps the community, and we want to hear what your ideas are. And so this was a huge community development initiative, and it definitely talked about how they're going to improve education in the region, how they're going to help people to get jobs in the region, how they're going to create a more sustainable community, how it's going to be environmentally sound. And there were, literally thousands of people who came to these meetings and participated and became part of this community development effort. And, and again, as I said, if you go to the website, you'll see that you can download all of the steps of everything that they did to get an idea of how this kind of project works. They've gotten awards from the American Planning Association for how they've done this, and it's just really cool. So that's another resource for you to look at. Next slide. Now, I would say for most regions in the country, we don't have a billionaire, and we don't even have like a large landowner that's giving us land. We're just kind of normal folk trying to figure this stuff out. And so that brings me to Mobilize Eastern Maine. And this is one of my favorite initiatives. I really like what they're doing in Eastern Maine. They got together and they recognized that they have two things that they are really the goals for their community. One is that they want to retain the jobs that they have, and the other is that they want to create new jobs. They were the two major goals. And so economic development decided to work closely with workforce development, in fact with their workforce investment board, and use those two criteria as the criteria that they determine all planning activities around. So this is really interesting. The workforce investment boards usually don't have any teeth. They don't have any muscle. They usually are just kind of trying to get along, you know, trying to get people to play nicely in the sandbox together type of thing. But in this case, they have given the workforce investment board tremendous clout, because the Workforce Investment Board signs off on, at the very end, signs off on every economic development initiative. So if it does not meet the muster of retaining jobs or creating jobs, it's given a lower priority. And the initiatives that they are working on in that community that have retaining jobs or creating jobs as, you know, kind of more of a major issue of those initiatives, they rise to the top. And the workforce board makes the final determination of what those initiatives are. So think about this. Economic development's dealing with infrastructure issues, you know, transportation, you know, they're dealing with, you know, like quality of life issues, all kinds of things, right? But those two criteria drive the decision making in that region. And so you can look at what where they started, what their baseline ideals, or what their baselines were, what their goals are, and how they are moving forward with, you know, improving wages in the region, with, you know, improving their labor participation rate. And, you know, I mean, one could argue that that's because the economy is improving, you know, but, you know, I give them a lot of credit for the fact that they're willing to get together and work so closely together. And they have a board of about 50 people who kind of, you know, get together and discuss all of this. And these are, you know, members of the community that have stepped forward and have rolled up their sleeves and said, you know, we want our region to be more successful than it has been in the past. This is, to me, a much more a much more realistic possibility for what regions are going to be capable of doing. And so I would encourage you to take a look at Mobilize Eastern Maine. Young woman I have spoken with there is Jen Brooks, and her boss is Mike Ayubi, who's the economic development director there. The other thing that's interesting about Mobilize Eastern Maine is that they actually, the economic development organization actually was the one-stop operator. So for people who are in the workforce system, you know, that's kind of strange, but a very interesting dynamic. Okay, next slide. This is also a wonderful website for you as a tool to learn more about community development. This is one of the very first things when I was doing my thesis way back in, you know, the early 1990s that I learned a great deal about how these things work. And so you know, while it's not necessarily specific when you think economic development and workforce development working together, but it's more all-encompassing of bringing the community to the table and having them participate in the ideas and the initiatives. And frankly, you know, things that are going to be successful are going to be initiatives in which you do embrace the community and what their goals and ideas are, and ideals for the community are. If you do it for them, it's going to die. I can almost assure you. If you do it with them, then they have become part of the part of the effort, and so they're going to stick around and try to make it work with you. And so this is asset-based community development is looking for what are the good things that are going on in your region, and how can you build on those good things rather than looking at what the deficits are in your region and trying to fix what's wrong there. And you know, it's funny, even in personal development, the Gallup organization, you know, Strengths Finder, a lot of these different programs that are coming out now are beginning to recognize that, you know, years ago we looked at, you know, well, you know, I'm not good at, you know, I don't know, trigonometry, so I'm going to try to improve on my trigonometry. Well, you know, what's more beneficial for you is if you're a good writer, then become a better writer rather than working on something that you can't do, because you know, you'll spend a lot more time and a lot more effort trying to fix something that's wrong than building on something that's right. And that is kind of something that we are just learning as human beings. And again, we're all learning this as we go along, but you know, it made sense when they talked about it with asset-based community development years ago. It makes sense on a personal level, and it's something that we really need to embrace as we're doing this economic development, workforce development collaboration. We need to recognize that we need to build on what the strengths are in our community, not look at, but we don't have this. You know, put that to the side and think about what you do have and how you can build on that. Next slide. So there are a lot of common tools that can be utilized in making these efforts come to fruition. Next slide, Ian. I can see I'm running low. It's just slow on time here, so I'm going to start flying through this a little faster. Talent Crosspoint is a customer resource management tool and then some. It is, you know, there are a number of customer resource management tools in the marketplace: Salesforce, Goldmine, ACT. There's a whole bunch of them. This one is specific to the needs of economic development and workforce development. The idea of a customer resource management tool is that you have a single database where you're gathering business intelligence from the community, and you're able to then share that information. So, you know, you've got workforce development people going out to talk to businesses in the community, you know, about tax credits and, you know, whatever, you know, incumbent worker training, whatever it is that they want to talk to businesses about. You've got the college going out and talking to businesses about what they want to talk about. You've got the, you know, economic development going out and talking to businesses. It's crazy. You've got all these different entities going out and talking to these businesses. They're trying to run a business. And, you know, and then you come back and none of you have shared the information that you've gathered with each other, and so you all have your own kind of, you know, separate ideas of what's going on with that business, whereas if you had a shared database, and granted, there are some, for example, with economic development, there are going to be some proprietary things that a business doesn't want to share with perhaps the community college or workforce development or other entities. But there are levels of access that can be provided. So there are, you know, for example, fields that could be, you know, available only to, for example, the economic development person. So, you know, I would say that one of the major tools that you need to embrace as you're moving forward with this economic development and workforce development collaboration, as kind of just a basic first step, once you've figured out who your industry sectors are, once you've kind of done a little bit of your labor market information study, as you begin to go out and talk with employers, you've got to have a single place where you can bring back that information and share that information, so that you're not driving the employers crazy, and that you also are providing an opportunity for each of you to grow in learning what that information is that's being gathered by the other entities in your region. And it's only by sharing your intelligence about the businesses in your region that you're actually going to be able to grow and move forward. So next slide. There are multiple grant writing opportunities that will be available to you. you know, if you decide to work together. Obviously, foundations, the Employment and Training Administration with the Department of Labor, the Economic Development Administration with SEDS planning, and surprisingly, there are a lot of workforce development folk who don't even know what SEDS planning is. And frankly, I didn't know until about 3 or 4 years ago. I didn't know what a SEDS plan was. And yet these have been around since like the 1970s. So SEDS planning, if you're not in economic development, it's comprehensive economic development strategy is what that SEDS stands for. And this is money that you can get from the Economic Development Administration through the Department of Commerce to not only implement plans, but actually to do the planning process. So for workforce people, that's like, wow, you know, I mean, we very, very seldom get money for the actual planning process. We get it for programming, but very seldom is there money available for planning. And this is an opportunity for you to work together with economic development to create these kinds of opportunities for your region. And certainly the SEDS can be used for workforce initiatives because it's all about helping the local economy to be stronger, and workforce issues are directly related to that. We did do a webinar about this. The Narita did a webinar last year with the regional director of, or former, he's retired now, for the Northeast, Paul Rage, from the Economic Development Administration. He and, in fact, Mike Ayubi, who was the person that I talked about from the Mobilize Eastern Maine initiative, were actually on the webinar together talking about SEDS planning. So I have provided you this information. Normally the webinar costs $159. I have provided you this information so that you can access this webinar for free. My gift to you today. So, but I think it's important, very important, that if you don't know what a SEDS plan is, that you become familiar with that. And then, you know, that's the kind of thing that you might want to bring a consultant in to assist you with your SEDS planning, and we certainly can help you with that. Okay, next slide. So here are a couple of quick examples of SEDS programs. I point to the one Alexandria and Arlington because what's kind of cool about that, what impresses me, is that there were 2 counties. Each of them had their own economic development person, but the WID director oversaw both Arlington and Alexandria. So he took the lead in developing the comprehensive economic development strategy. Even though that's normally an economic development initiative, the WID director in this case took the lead and in developing the comprehensive economic development strategy. So that's, I thought, really cool. This one for Centralina, North Carolina, and Catawba, South Carolina, very fascinating because, first of all, it crosses state lines. This was also an initiative from CALE, the Council on Adult and Experiential Learning, that helped them with that. And so, you know, we don't have a lot of time to kind of delve into these, but, you know, take a look. They are on the resource slide at the end if you want to take a look and read more about them. Okay, next slide. This is a website that Narita put together. The very first webinar that Narita ever did was about improving Workforce Investment Board websites and understanding that Workforce Investment Boards are part of the marketing effort of their region. They don't really see themselves that way historically, again, because they came from kind of a background of providing social services programming. But Workforce Investment Boards, absolutely, talent is the most important reason why a business would expand or stay or locate to a region. And so, you know, the the very fact that the workforce board oversees basically the talent for the entire region, and developing that talent, it's really important to begin to understand that your website should reflect that, and should let employers who might be looking at the region, looking to locate in the region, helping them to understand that you are part of the effort that makes that region more successful. And what's this widwebsite.com is kind of a compilation of a lot of best practices. If you go on, you'll see a whole bunch of links on the different tabs of this website, of things that I've just seen around the country that I thought were kind of cool ideas. And so you can just go on this website and peruse around and see some neat ideas. If you have some other ideas that come to mind, or of some programs or projects that are going on that would be good examples, please let me know about them, and we'll add them to this Progressville Workforce Investment Board pretend website. Okay, next slide. Now, one of the things that the Vice President Biden report that we talked about for the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act talks about is creating those stepping stones, or what we're going to call career pathways. In this case, they call it roadmap. Understanding, what does it take? If I have an affinity toward working in a particular industry, I've always liked healthcare. Okay, well, what level? How much do I want to invest of myself in training? How much does the training cost? Where can I get the training? Is the training provider any good? Are they able to get me a job after I do the training? What would be the next steps after I get the training and get the job? What would be the next thing that I could move to if I wanted to continue on in my career? These are all valid questions. And, we do have the Bureau of Labor Statistics provides an occupational outlook website that is pretty good about providing information about what a job is and how much it pays, but it's not state specific, and it doesn't connect to jobs, and it doesn't connect to trainers, and so it leaves a lot to be desired, frankly. And I think that this Texas Hot Jobs does a pretty cool job of, this is done by the AHEC organization in Texas, and it's only for healthcare because it's AHEC, but they do a pretty good job of laying out what the roadmaps are and the potential trainers for the region and those kinds of things. So again, it's another example that you can pull from if you're trying to develop some sort of roadmaps for people for careers in your region. Next slide. Okay, so in some cases we have to take our heads off and turn them around sideways and try something new, and I call that ideology restructuring. Next slide. I've got a couple of examples here of what I'm talking about with regard to ideology restructuring. In Pennsylvania, they pulled together a huge summit of people for a couple of days to talk about workforce development and economic development working together. And out of that, they have talked about the different industry sectors in Pennsylvania, and they have provided some money on a regional basis, not for each WIB, but regionally, so that the WIBs have to start thinking in broader terms. And they're looking at how are you going to work together with economic development and create the better, more opportunities for job seekers and for employers who need a skilled workforce. And so I think the Jobs First program was a pretty innovative idea. They do have a new governor in Pennsylvania, and I'm hoping that he doesn't, oftentimes when you have a new administration come in, they get rid of everything that the old administration did and start with all new stuff. And I'm really kind of hoping this is one initiative that Tom Wolf keeps and looks at as, you know, it looks kindly upon and continues to fund, because I do think that there's a lot of benefit from the direction that they are going with this. I've seen a couple of the RFPs that have come out from the different regions and how they're looking to coordinate their workforce development and economic development strategies, and I think that that's a really healthy, good start for where this needs to go. I think that there's a lot that can be done beyond that, but you've got to start somewhere, and I think that this was a really great idea, and I would welcome you to go to their Jobs First website and take a look at it. Almost the whole conference is listed up there on, they have videos that you can watch of the different speakers that they had and that kind of thing. So pretty interesting stuff, so you might want to take a look at that. Next slide. Okay, so this is the Ford Next Generation Learning Project, and I actually learned about this from Emily Brown at the International Economic Development Council. She was talking about Coachella Valley, I think it's called, in California, and this is a really awesome project. Again, this comes from a foundation, but they're really looking at how the schools are training students and how we can begin to prepare the students for the next, you know, for going into the community. And so it's about helping the teachers to understand what kinds of opportunities are available in their region for the students. It's about changing some of the teaching methods so that the students are better prepared for jobs in the community, and it's also about, you know, kind of a basic leadership shift in economic development and workforce development working together to provide these opportunities for young people that are coming into the region. So again, this is another initiative that you can take a look at as a resource. And, you know, it's interesting, going back to the Career Source Florida that I was talking about from Chris Hart, one of the things that he talks about in the speech is that education has to be at the table in order for this to work. And he's right. It doesn't have to be the first one of the first people at the table. You know, again, I believe that economic development and workforce development have to be the first ones at the table, setting the initial agenda. But education has to come in shortly thereafter in helping to helping to figure out what the overall strategy of a region will be. And so this is, you know, these are a lot of great ideas for next generation learning as how you can engage, especially the K through 12 system, in creating a more sustainable community going forward. Next slide. Now, you know, we have ideological changes, right? But then you have, sometimes you actually have to physically change organizational structures in order to make something work. And so go ahead to the next slide, Ian. We'll start going through these organizational structural changes that have gone on. In New Jersey, we have something called the Community College Consortium for Workforce and Economic Development. And what this is all of the community colleges in New Jersey have gotten together and decided that they will collaborate in providing services to employers. So, in other words, if one college is better at aerospace information, research, training, those kinds of things, then this organization will direct an employer to that college. So in other words, they're not, you know, in a lot of states, most states I would say, community colleges, and all colleges frankly, operate as their own fiefdoms. And that's unfortunate that they're not collaborating, because they're missing out on the big picture of what it is that they are really charged with doing, which is being a resource for their community, state, region, however you want to say it. And so, you know, this is an impressive program. It's very progressive, and it works in New Jersey in part because we're a small state that's densely populated. And, you know, I don't know that if you were in Nebraska, and you have from one side of the state to the other, if it makes sense for an employer to have to, reach out to a college at the other end of the state. But certainly on a regional basis, if you're in a, you could say just the eastern side of Nebraska, that maybe you would do this. I think it's worth taking a look at. It's worth saying, colleges, is there a way for us to collaborate and work together so that we don't all have to be experts in everything, and so that we're not competing with one another, but that we are really building on what the best assets are of each of our universities or institutions. Okay, next slide. Also in New Jersey, there is a new initiative, fairly new, it's a couple of years old, where they're calling it the Talent Networks. This is, I'm going to call it a work in progress. It's got a long way to go, but it's building some steam. What they did is they looked at what the major employers are in New Jersey and how they these 7 major industries hire more than 50% of the people in New Jersey. And so they said, well, we're going to really concentrate on these major industries and, kind of emphasize, again, build on our assets. And so they've developed a website for each one of these industries that, again, provides career pathway information, training information, jobs information. It's kind of like an overarching website. Some of them are moving toward having LinkedIn groups where they can begin to communicate with employers and job seekers that are interested in that same industry. And interestingly, going back to that Andy Chan YouTube video from Winston-Salem, North Carolina, they're doing the same thing. They have a LinkedIn group where the employers in the region can talk with the students. Now think about how powerful that could be if they then had subgroups based on industry. I should probably call Andy Chan and recommend that. Anyway, but this is what New Jersey is doing. It is definitely progressive. It's definitely the direction that the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act is asking us to move into with regard to looking at industry sectors and capitalizing on those industry sectors that are of the biggest benefit to our region. Next slide. This one really will twist your mind a little bit. This is, I love this. This is an organization out of Southwest Michigan, and they were the Workforce Investment Board, but they have changed their vision for who they are and what they do to be much broader and much more focused on economic development. So they have projects related specifically to helping to grow businesses. They have projects specifically geared toward entrepreneurship, for example. And these are things that typically workforce investment boards or the workforce system were very divorced from. So I would recommend taking a look at, this is another way of organizing, planning, and again, I'm not saying that any of these is the right way. These are just a lot of different potential possibilities of how you could organize in your region that might be more beneficial or more progressive in helping your region. Okay, next slide. There's a gentleman by the name of Ed Gordon who has done a lot of writing. He has many, many books in the marketplace, and he does a lot of consulting around the country. And one of his innovations has been something that he calls the Regional Talent Innovation Networks, where he brings together parents and students, business, labor, educators, government, all kind of working together through this, what he calls retains intermediary. And I love what Ed says here over on the side, about the fact that the United States businesses have seen that usually any involvement that they have with schools they saw as charitable giving, that it was a kind of a volunteer corporate goodness out of the goodness of their heart kind of thing. Being good corporate citizens, I will say. But now, even the largest corporations are beginning to realize that they can't solve their talent shortages unless they become involved with this regional workforce systemic change. So they really, now they're starting to realize that it wasn't just good corporate citizenship, it actually impacted on their bottom line. It really does affect the quality of the workforce that they're going to have in the future. And so, these retained networks are, another opportunity for how to organize and collaborate and create, a way for people to have an opportunity to participate and express what they believe the goals of the region are and what their needs, how are their needs for the region going to be met. And that's both on the side of employers and on the side of job seekers. Okay, next slide. And then this brings us to the fact that, we can't kind of get away from the fact that a lot of the opportunities being presented to us coming into the future are going to be technological. And so there are going to be a lot of, new projects that present that initially may make some people lose their job because technology is taking the place of that job, but then we have to figure out how those displaced workers then become absorbed or get moved into other opportunities. Now, I say that because metrics learning could potentially displace some career counselors. And I say that because it's a very self-directed program. They have a whole lot of different skills training programs involved in this. You can take yourself through with a self-directed project and figure out where your gaps in learning are. You can figure out what skills training you need. You can do the skills training. You can get the certification online, all by yourself, all online, without any other human intervention. It's pretty powerful. And when you see this, I see people like quaking in their shoes, but that means that we'll lose our jobs. I want to tell you a brief story. I know we're toward the end. I'm over my time right now, but I want to tell you this brief story. In New Jersey, several years ago, there was a pot of money that was going to the Board of Social Services for teaching people who were on welfare, receiving TANF benefits. It was for teaching them how to write resumes and how to interview and, kind of workforce issues. And so the state legislature said, well, we already have the workforce system that does that, so we're going to move that money over to the workforce system. And it was a substantial amount of money, and the Board of Social Services people were really up in arms. They were just furious about this. And when you got right down to talking with them about it, yes, there probably were going to be a few people who lost their job initially, but their biggest fear was that they were going to lose a lot of jobs because the workforce system was going to do such a good job of getting people jobs that there wouldn't be that many people on welfare anymore. Now, that should be a good thing, right? that should be a good thing. But that was, for them, that was scary because they were going to lose their jobs. And what I'm saying, I'm bringing that up to you because I want you to realize that progress doesn't happen, without impacting someone somewhere in a negative way. And that doesn't mean that we shouldn't continue to progress. We must continue to progress, and we must continue to look at online technologies and how they're going to help us move forward and achieve the skills and the quality workforce that we need, even if it means initially displacing some workers. So that's just another lesson learned. Next slide. So, at the end of the day, right now we have economic development that is kind of between business and government. They're sort of working um, the integration between those two entities. Workforce development, on the other side, is kind of working the integration between education and government. Yeah, touches a little bit on business, but it's really been working much more closely with between education and government. And the ultimate opportunity here is that economic development and workforce development are working so closely together that they both are impacting on business, government, and education equally. So we need businesses to be integrated with education just as much as we need economic development integrated with education, just as much as we need workforce development integrated with business, et cetera, et cetera. So, it's getting our heads wrapped around the idea of workforce development and economic development being the center of the storm, so to speak, and coming up with the initial strategy. What are the industry sectors that we want to concentrate on in our area? How are we going to get to some kind of an agreement of strategic planning? What are the assets that we want to build on in our region? Who are the next people that we're going to invite to come to the table, so that we don't get bowled over and kind of pushed around with, what it is that we're trying to accomplish. These are all things that, we can step in and help you with, because this is big. This is, it's overwhelming. You can see that there are a multitude of different ways of organizing, and we just hope that we have helped you to understand the opportunities that are available to you. And again, nobody knows how to do this the right way. There isn't one right way. There are lots and lots of possible ways, but the most important thing that you can do is to continuously improve on what it is that you've started with, in the way that CareerSource Florida is learning from, as they implement, and then they learn from what it is that they did and grow from that. So next slide, Ian. I do want to mention briefly that the Northeast Regional Employment and Training Association has been working on this topic of workforce development and economic development collaborating for 2 years now. We've done a number of webinars that touch on economic development and workforce development collaborating. I would invite you to visit our website and take a look at these. We also would like to know what kinds of webinars that you would like going forward. We certainly can touch on some of the topics in more depth that we've discussed today. Next slide, Ian. Here are some of the webinars that we are planning coming up, but we certainly can go into, as I said, more depth on other topics, either that were presented today or even other ones that you have ideas about that you would like more information on. Happy to help provide information for the public. We have been very honored to be supported by Camoin Associates for these last several months to be able to provide these webinars to you, and we're delighted in that way to have this collaboration with economic development. Narita coming from the workforce development side, and we hope that the collaboration will continue, and that you will again inform us as to how we can help you to grow and move forward. Next slide. These are all the list of things that we've talked about today. This will be posted on YouTube in I guess a few days, and so you'll have this entire video webinar on YouTube to be able to refer back to. We also will have the slides on the Camoin blog, so you'll be able to take a look at those. And I guess next slide, Ian, is the close. And this is our contact information. Feel free to reach out and let us know how we can help you. As I said, there's an awful lot to this. We understand that it can be overwhelming, but we are here to help you. Okay, Ian, do we have any questions?
Thank you so much, Colleen. At this point, we do have one question. If anyone else has a question, please feel free to use the chat function and ask us. If we don't have time to get to it before 2:30, we'll definitely follow up with you via email and respond to your question. Right now, Colleen, the first question is, do you know what Massachusetts state agency administers the Workforce Readiness Certificate?
That's their Department of Labor that's doing that. So you can reach out to the Massachusetts. I don't have, it's DETMA, D-E-T-M-A, I know is the Department of Employment and Training Massachusetts, I guess, DETMA.com, but you can just call the Department of Labor, and I'm sure that they will be able to direct you to that. If you can't find somebody there, the state WIB would be a very small entity that would definitely know who the right person is at the Department of Labor to reach out to. So you might want to start with their State Workforce Investment Board person and ask them who the right person at the Department of Labor would be to talk with.
Okay, great. Then do you know, Colleen, do you find that states outside of New Jersey support or encourage registered apprenticeships as a workforce development strategy?
Well, that certainly is part of the new legislation, and we, the hard part about apprenticeships is that it's something that has to be created between a job seeker and an employer. They have to kind of come to an agreement that they are, interested in working with one another in that way, and unless they have previously, like the employer, unless the employer has previously brought on an apprentice, this might be a new concept to them that they're unfamiliar with. So it's a little bit hard to move it along, because it's not like it's a funded project. It's not like it's something that you can, that the government's putting money toward. It really, it's more of an agreement. A memorandum of understanding almost between the two entities that I will go to school, I will continue to learn while I work for your organization. So it's kind of a hard thing to make happen, and but it's definitely a successful strategy. We've seen that. That's why it's being suggested so much in the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, and we see people like Peter Capelli who are talking about how important apprenticeship is, and we certainly, I'm supportive, very much so, of apprenticeship, but I think that we probably have to do a better job of marketing apprenticeship. And I mean, you can be an apprentice in just about anything, and I don't think people realize that. Typically when we think of apprentices, we think of them in the trades, but you can be an apprentice in just about any occupation that you can dream of if you can get an employer to agree to take you on in that way.
Okay, great. And then we have another question about, do you have any suggestions as far as strategies for recruiting businesses to participate in your workforce development strategy?
Okay, one more time.
Oh,
Sorry.
I'm sorry. Any suggestions as to how to successfully recruit businesses to participate in your workforce development strategy? So getting them on your steering committee or on your WIP board.
Okay. Yeah, well, that's the hard part, of course, because they're profit motivated, right? So they're busy running a business. The bottom line is you've got to sell to them that their profit is going to improve by becoming engaged. They have to understand that they're engaging not just for the goodness, through the goodness of their hearts or as good corporate citizens, but rather that by engaging, they are creating sustainability for their organization, that they are helping to create a stronger economic viability for the region, them becoming engaged really improves their business from a number of different aspects. Obviously, better quality of life in a region, is better for their employees. I mean, there are just a multitude of good things that happen when employers engage in helping to create the right training opportunities for people to become employed, at some point in the future. in their organization. Excuse me. So I would suggest when you position this this invitation, that you position it in such a way that it is to their benefit. You know, that it's not just something that they're doing, you know, for the goodness, but rather for their profit, you know, that's going to benefit them in a profitable way. I would also suggest, you know, again, that you look at doing this by industry sector and looking at just one industry sector in your region first, and bringing the employers together, even competitors, you know, that are in the same industry, bringing them together to sit at the table together to talk about what their training needs are. I think you'll be surprised to find that while it might be a little cool the first half hour, they begin to start warming up when they recognize that they have many similar issues in common, and that there are, especially if you also bring the community college president, you know, maybe a couple of presidents from the four-year universities in your region, you bring together the superintendent of schools, you know, so they have K through 12 representation there, and they can begin to see, you know, the vocational school superintendent, you know, when they begin to see that you are bringing resources to bear to help solve their problems, they're going to be much more likely to stay engaged with you. The tough part is getting them there initially. I understand that, but the invite really has to appeal to their profit motivation.
Okay, great. And then this will be the final question. If you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out to us. As you can see, our contact information is on this final slide. All the slides will be available on the Coin Associates blog, and the recording will be available on our YouTube channel. We will send out an email to everyone who registered for the webinar with that information. So if there's anything you want to follow up on, or if you want to ask a question of any of us, please feel free to reach out to us. We'd be happy to talk to you. So the final question before we sign off, Colleen, do you have any suggestions about how to engage WIBs as part of the SEDS process?
Well, you know, I mean, it shouldn't be a huge effort if they understand what it is. I think the first thing that you have to do is go out and sit down and talk with them and explain to them that, hey, there's money available for us to do some planning here in the region. Would you be willing to sit down and help us do some planning if it meant that there could potentially be some funding available for programs or projects or initiatives that would be helpful to the workforce system? I think, you know, again, money makes the world go round. You know, everybody's everybody's interested in money. So if you know, you definitely will get the WIB director's attention if you tell them that there is a pot of funding available if they're willing to come to the table and sit and talk about what their needs are and what the issues in the region are.
Okay, great. Well, thank you all for your time this afternoon. We really appreciate you participating in this webinar. Again, we will be sending out an email with information about how to access all of these resources, as well as a survey, so you can tell us how we're doing and make any suggestions about future webinars that you would be interested in. And thank you again for your time this afternoon. We look forward to presenting other webinars for you in the future. And thank you, Colleen, for all your help.
It's been my pleasure, my honor. Thank you very much, Camoin, for sponsoring these NREDA webinars, and we look forward to working with you in the future.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good afternoon.